Harry this morning. It didn't seem fair that Harry, having just been appointed, was asked to come in and chair a meeting that he'd had no time to prepare for. So as those of you that know me, you will know I'm completely prepared for this meeting. And we will run through in the usual fashion. So can we start with the minutes of the previous meeting, please? All happy? Fantastic. I am only going to take this as a one-item agenda, which you all know. So we'll start with apologies and substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Jeremy for today, Councillor Eagle, Councillor Richmond and Councillor Wickerson, and we have substitutes Councillor Atterwill, Councillor Hunter-Clark and Councillor Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies from Councillor Land.
Noted. I have no chairman's announcements. I'm not aware of any urgent business. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Non-members wishing to address the meeting, welcome if you're here, and I look forward to hearing from you, but hopefully not for too long. Straight on to item 7. I believe, Paul, you're going to start the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. And Ruth, just as you pull up the presentation, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the panel. Thank you for other people who are looking at this afternoon. Before I start, I just want to say one thing from the outset. This is a critical subject and a service area that affects just about every resident and most of our businesses within the district. This is not something that we have taken lightly. It's something that we have been preparing for a considerable period of time to make sure that what we are presenting this afternoon and our plans for the future are clear, are fair, are responsible as a council facing some budgetary challenges moving forwards. I also need to add that since the initial press release on Monday about this meeting and Cabinet on next week, there has already been a large amount of disinformation in this area, some of which I raised this morning in full council. I don't know whether some of this misinformation is driven by misunderstanding or fear or mischief, but I do believe, those present in this room at the moment, that whatever your initial view, we owe it now to ourselves and to our residents to be clear about the facts and the reasonings for what we're about to cover this afternoon, and that's the purpose for this presentation in front of you now. By way of introduction, the ambitions of our planned strategic focus are ones of fairness and budgetary responsibility. Those will be recurring terms that we will use throughout the afternoon. Any car park strategy for any council in any location must be fair to all stakeholders across that area, those living in towns, villages and in between, to our residents, to our shops and to our businesses, large and small, to car owners and to non-car owners, to communities and to our taxpayers. We need to be fair and responsible to us now and in the future. We need to be responsible for those who pay into our budgets, and we need to take responsibility for those who we use our budgets to support. And we need to be fair and consistent throughout. We are, and I am acutely aware of the sensitivities covering and surrounding the provision of public car parking. So thank you for giving me and the team, who I'll introduce shortly, the time to present some of the work that we've currently engaged with and plan to continue to engage on in this critical service area. I am also astutely aware that this presentation may run the risk of becoming unstructured. We have external consultants here with us, so I please would ask all colleagues, whether on the panel or otherwise, whatever your preference or personal position, to listen with an open mind, if not an open heart. Next slide, please, Ruth. Before I do pass over to our external expert consultants, though, I do want to set the scene for this panel and for anyone who might be looking in at this presentation from outside. We need to provide some context to the presentation and to the proposals contained within it. You will, I hope, no doubt, have seen and read the report that is coming up to Cabinet on Monday. I do hope you've read it. It is detailed, it is substantial, and it is very comprehensive, looking at car park by car park, town by town, hour by hour, day by day, the car park usage that we currently experience within our towns. The report on Monday proposes a change in policy for the council and the reasons why that change is needed. It suggests and makes recommendations as to how that change will be affected, but this will be subject to significant consultation with our residents and our businesses over the next 15 to 16 months to make sure that that change is affected in a fair and responsible way. Like most councils, we are facing budget pressures. You only had to hear Phil's comment at full council this morning on our Q4 performance to confirm that. This is forcing us to take a clear and fresh look at all of the services that we provide across the district. We're also looking at how our services are funded and how we can maintain a responsible, sustainable, balanced budget to make sure that we can continue to deliver excellent value in everything that we do to enable our residents and our businesses to thrive. To help with this, we have, and you are very aware, as a commission and as members, a council-wide efficiency programme which looks at a number of different options all the way across the council as to how we can do things differently, more effectively and more efficiently in order to enable savings for this council and for our taxpayer. Just one of those areas is the provision of public car parking in our market towns. Our car parks, our council-owned car parks, are currently funded from our main council budget, with some 30 car park sites with some 2,200 car park place spaces. The current cost of this is £250,000 of revenue budget and approximately £200,000 of capital budget each and every year. These costs are paid by everybody, whether they own a car or not, and 1 in 4 households in Thetford, of course, do not even own a car. This moves to about 1 in 5 in some of our other market towns. These costs are paid whether the households have 1 vehicle or 2 vehicles. These costs are paid whether a household has a garage to store a vehicle in or not. These costs are paid for by our businesses. These costs are paid whether a resident is poor, is vulnerable, or is well off. It is a cost paid by people whether they use our car parks or do not use our car parks. And I do not believe in the current budgetary environment that that is fair. So today, I would like to update the Commission on some of the work that we have been undertaking to review our current car parking management process. Members of this Commission will, of course, be aware that this work has been going on for some time. In fact, last time I spoke to you as asset manager, you referred to some of the work that was ongoing in terms of that car parking provision. It has also been raised in Council and in Cabinet by colleagues over the last number of months, if not years. Shortly, I'm going to hand over to our expert consultants from Parking Matters, who have conducted a feasibility study on our behalf to examine all of the different options for delivering our car parking services. This feasibility study follows other studies carried out by this council going back to 2003, repeated in 2012 and in 2015 to 16. The study reflects our parking enforcement trials across Swaffham and Attleborough that encouraged and achieved increased churn of spaces as a result. The study also follows informal conversations with various town representatives during the intervening period. There were other, further, detailed, analytical and published surveys in the latter part of 2023 to understand exactly how the usage of our car parks have changed, particularly following the COVID slowdown. The survey and the feasibility work have identified a number of issues with how the district's public car parks are used and how they best serve visitors, residents, and local businesses. One issue, for instance, was the need to make more spaces to be available on some sites during peak periods. Many car parks have restricted churn levels, holding trade back from our market towns if visitors cannot find a space to park in. And certainly the research and feedback comments regarding the Attleborough and Swaffham trials consistently backed this up. If people drive into our towns and cannot find a space to park because those spaces are blocked, they leave and go elsewhere, and that outcome helps no one. Added to this challenge, as I mentioned earlier, are the increasing pressures on our resources that seek to balance our work with vulnerable residents, with our Breckland Cares campaigns, and our Inspiring Communities efforts alongside our budgeted cost and revenue commitments over the medium term. In that respect, car park provision provides a budgetary burden on the taxpayer, as we identified earlier on, and risks diverting monies away from those who need our services most. I do not believe that this is something that we as a council, and we certainly as members, should ignore. We need to act. We need to take the difficult decisions, even if they might involve difficult choices, and we need to make those difficult decisions now. So given that this is such an important subject, we wanted to discuss this with you first before we look at it at Cabinet next Monday. We wanted to share with you directly the work that we commissioned from our experts in this area over a considerable period of time. So I will now hand over to Gordon and Ben from Parking Matters, who will introduce themselves, present their findings and recommendations, and then seek questions in terms of how and why and what we need to do next. At times, this will make for hard listening because it will necessitate hard choices. No doubt you will have questions, but I would be grateful, and I suspect Parking Matters would also be grateful, that we allow them to deliver the presentation first and take any questions at the end. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with what's just been said. I would rather we had the full presentation. Then if you can reserve your questions until that concludes, and then I'll work my way around the room. So I don't know who's starting, whether it's Ben or Gordon or both of you together, but the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. If we can just move the slide on, please.
Can we turn the volume up, please?
And the next one as well, please. Next slide. Just in terms of, I'll start with some introductions. I'm Gordon Allison, and I'm a director at Parking Matters. Just to briefly outline who we are, Parking Matters are a specialist parking consultancy, and we work with both the public and private sectors. We have a diverse range of council clients, including large unitary authorities and smaller urban and rural district councils. We are a small team, but collectively we have decades of parking experience. I personally am from a property and private sector parking background, And my colleague, Ben Robinson, is from a public and transport policy one. I'll now pass you on to Ben, who will provide you with a summary of the work that we have recently carried out on behalf of the Council. Thank you, Ben.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are my volumes okay? Okay. Could you move the slides on, please? And again. Perfect. So I'm going to take you through some of the more detailed technical aspects of the work. Going back to the brief, this was a bottom-up process. There was no assumption made as to what the eventual solution should be, and we designed a methodology with that in mind. The first step is always to consider your objectives and policies and how parking can support your local area. So we took this into advice and looked at certain information such as the local plans and the town delivery plans. Then there was an awful lot of analysis, as you can see in the report, of available data, including statistical data, followed by site visits to consider the market conditions and looking at how Breckland compares to nearby councils and other places across the east and south of England. Bringing this together, we considered the strategic options which could apply and finally provided recommendations. Next slide, please. It's worth applying some national context. From the research and information that's out there, people want parking to be forgettable. They want to get in, get out, pay a reasonable rate, and they don't want to be treated unfairly. People do expect to pay for parking. They recognise that there's a supply and demand issue here, and parking needs to be managed. The tariff must reflect the location, which is why in the centre of Cambridge you can pay up to £14 for a few hours, but you don't usually expect to pay in a retail park. It is very difficult to assess the impact of parking charges on centres due to wider economic factors, but generally from the information available, as long as tariffs are reasonable, availability and location matter more than the price. Parking will always be a grudge payment. People don't really want to pay for it, but they do accept that they have to. Next slide, please. Just looking at some of the recent changes, especially in light of COVID. Well, in our work and talking to colleagues across the industry, parking levels have largely recovered from COVID, but commuters levels remain much lower on Mondays and Fridays than the rest of the week. Leisure trips have replaced much of the commuter demand, especially for the railways, for example. The retail environment remains very challenging. That really reinforces the requirement for space availability and turnover of spaces. Data is becoming increasingly important to manage parking services and provide customers with information. Ideally, customers should be able to know where they can park, how much it's going to cost, and ideally how full it is. We're some way off that in most towns in the country. Customers increasingly prefer cashless payments. The graph there is from a council we're working with in the south of England, and you can see the before and after COVID, coins has gone down from 50% to roughly a third, with a corresponding rise in cards and phone. This was happening before COVID, but COVID really has accelerated it. Next slide, please. So really focusing down on Breckland, mainly drawing on the surveys that you commissioned last year. Whilst there are variations between your sites, in general, the largest proportion of stays are under an hour. That's exactly what we'd expect from our work elsewhere. There are quite a few longer stays, and in some car parks there is low churn, i.e. the number of times a space is used during the day. There were obvious signs of residents using the sites as residential car park. You can tell that from the survey data. In some cases, a car would be there in the morning, didn't move all day, and then would still be there in the evening at the end of the survey. With few exceptions, most of your car parks were 2/3 or higher during the peak, and the peak for most of yours, as they're mixed car parks, is between 10 and 4 p.m. But this does mean that people will be finding it hard to find a space, and even then, they might end up at the back of the car park because the commuters have filled all the more convenient spaces nearest the shops up long before they got there. Distilling this all down and bringing the national experience with the local data, the strategic options available to you are effectively more enforcement and stricter time limits, for which there will be a significant financial cost because it's more patrols and all the rest of it. You could try and increase the supply of parking. On street would be difficult. On streets restrictions are put there for a reason, so it's unlikely to yield much. You could look to increase the supply of off-street parking, but obviously there's a very large expense there, and fundamentally, do you have the land? Or, like most local authorities and most large private operators in towns, you could introduce tariffs which are reasonable and relate to your place. Next slide, please. So the overall study conclusions were that Breckland is one of the only authorities in the local area not to charge for parking, and most local authorities in England do charge at the point of use for their parking services. Providing free parking represents a significant cost to you, which is borne by all of your taxpayers rather than those that use it. Car parks in Breckland district would benefit from increased management and increases to churn and parking availability, which should encourage people to visit your towns more often. Overall, we recommended implementing point of use tariffs. These would pay for the upkeep and increase space availability and churn rate. And charging for parking is fairer in that it shifts the cost to the user of the facility rather than from all taxpayers living in the district, whether they use a car or not. These tariffs should reflect a fair rate, which we benchmarked in the report. You can see all the data there. Once you've made a decision in principle to charge, you will need to consider specific groups with permits. But that would be part of the implementation process, and it will require quite a bit of engagement with users. If you look at the report, we did look at what the impact of charges might have on local streets and so on. From what we know from everywhere else, you will see a drop-off when charges are introduced, but this will recover quite quickly within months. Next slide, please. So it's all about the customer. We want people to visit your towns, and that means the parking experience needs to be easy, quick, and forgettable. These days, that means cashless, which means no more trying to find 20p's down the back of your seat. It means ticketless, so that's generally putting your license plate into the machine rather than sticking a pay and display sticker to the windscreen, and contactless, which is obviously quicker and doesn't require well, you still need PIN pads just in case, but most people won't need to use them. As well as good for the customer, this approach will also give you much better data, and it will help with efficient enforcement, because the CEOs can go around with handhelds and scan the license plates rather than look for pay and display tickets. In terms of payment options, well, debit card, of course. We suggest check-in, check-out, which would allow users to pay when they leave rather than when they arrive, which means they don't have to estimate the time they're going to spend. They can just spend longer in the town, hopefully, if they want. By phone and app, of course, which has the added benefit of allowing top-ups. So if they need an hour extra, they can just put it on their phone. It would be possible to set up PayPoint prepay options for anyone who requests them, or for those who've had access to a debit card. Although these days, a recent stat we just got sent, 98% of people do have debit cards anyway. We also recommend you join the National Parking Platform, which is a DFT-led project which we're involved in. This acts as a publicly owned neutral service which manages payments in the background and would give customers the freedom to choose whichever payment app they wanted. So next slide, please. So finally, these are the initial tariff recommendations. The tariffs in each town should be fixed at levels to reflect their individual characteristics. and they should be in line with other rural districts and smaller towns in the south and east of England. We suggest it's kept simple and easy to understand at the beginning, Monday to Saturday, 8 till 6 p.m, with a fixed all-day price on Sunday to encourage lower, relaxed leisure stays. Again, permit options will need to be considered in detail as you move to the implementation phase, but these are well understood by the industry. They simply require engagement and thought. And with that, I'll pass you back over to Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you for providing the overview in terms of what the work that you've undertaken for us and your findings. Ruth, please, next slide. Thank you. And the next one, please. Following the work that Parking Matters have undertaken, we have taken some considerable time to consider exactly how the Council can implement these feasibility findings in a fair and a considered way. Essentially, on the slide in front of you now are the proposals for a new car parking policy which involves an element of charging. The new policy would cover all towns in the district to ensure a fair and consistent district-wide approach. Each town, though, would have a tariff rate that reflected the size and the offering of that town as per the information and the recommendations from Parking Matters. The charging period would be between 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night, Monday to Saturday, with Sunday parking charged at a fixed rate. We will provide a free parking concession period. This will be 1 hour in one car park, identified by the town in question every day, and with the exception of Thetford, because of the nature of the car parks, there will be 2 car parks with a 1 hour free period. And this period will be extended for market day in each market town. We will also provide a small number of free parking days annually for every town to support local events, as we know how important these local events are. Users with disabilities and a blue badge will be given additional time to exit the car park after a period of parking. As indicated, a suitable permit system in relevant car parks for residents and businesses will be implemented on a town-by-town basis. There will be long stay and there will be short stay parking limitations on specific and appropriate car parks based on the data and the evidence obtained by our expert consultants. Charging will apply to any allocated electrical vehicle space and to disabled spaces. We are in the closing stages of forging a solution that introduces a paid car park system that is the fairest, the most responsible, and the most affordable way to continue to provide public car parking services, which is why we have brought this to you now. These proposals are focused on ensuring the sustainability of our car parks and of our wider budget commitments to those more vulnerable within our district. We expect that by adopting a fairer funding model, we would see the improvement in availability of car parking spaces within our towns, that in turn bolsters trade to support our high street businesses. In conclusion, as I said at the start, we recognise this is a difficult decision to make. We recognise that money is tight for many people, residents and businesses. This is not, has not, and will continue to not be an easy decision. But by charging just a small fee for parking, we not only can protect our public car park facilities in the longer term, but we can also continue our ability to invest in the other vital community services that our residents and our businesses so sorely need. Next and final slide, please, Ruth. So thank you for listening. We are happy to take questions on the reasoning and the approach for our proposals for a paid parking service. We're happy to take questions on the surveys undertaken to determine the valid data set on what we could and what we based our conclusions on. And we're more than happy to take questions on our planned pricing methodology and approach that creates a fairer outcome and a sensible, responsible budgetary outcome for all of our stakeholders. Thank you, Commission.
Thank you very much for those that have presented. Members asking questions. I'll start with the Chairman, Harry Clark.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to the consultants for their presentations. And it's very pleasing to see such a huge complement of senior officers here to field any question we've got, which pays testament to the seriousness which I'm sure Breckland is taking this project with, and also the sensitivity that Councillor Hewitt has referred to, and some concerns which may or may not be justified in the public domain. Turning to actual questions, my first one is, obviously I will be attending the Cabinet, and without presuming to prejudge the Cabinet decision, if the Cabinet approves this, I'm assuming that when you talk about consultation you talk about in the question and Q&A about a 4-week consultation period for each car park, that's consulting about the implementation but not the principle of charging. That's my first question, if I can bear with me on that. It'd be helpful to have the timescale talked about more and fleshed out in terms of the Cabinet approving and how you undertake the consultation. And it seems that it's going to be, from looking at the Q&A in the report, that it will be in each individual car park across the same time you're going to be doing the 4-week period. There's been discussion, leaving aside the pressures on the budget and other issues relating to that, which may come up at other forums. In terms of the actual car park, I mean, you've laid out carefully in the report, members have also been advised elsewhere about the current costs, capital revenue costs of maintaining it. There may be reference I've seen somewhere to, and I think it's also been mentioned this morning, that is not sought to be a money-making exercise, which begs the question, if you look at, in terms of helping the budget, if you look, I think, at 5.2 constitutional legal, it does refer, I think, to the various road traffic acts, etc., and it then refers to the revenue that you make from such land that you own in terms of car parks, having specific purposes to which it could be applied. So it mentions environmental and so on and so forth. It didn't seem that if supposing we gained double the revenue that we were to offset, supposing we gained £1 million instead of £500,000 that it cost to maintain it, we could automatically say, right, that's going to shore up other aspects of the budget. So really just teasing out what the legislation allows you to do under going by your report to Cabinet, what it allows us to do with anything over and above and where we might put it. I'm sure that question may well have been thought of, but that's just my initial comments, Paul. Thank you.
And if I may, I will pass on to my colleagues to the right-hand side. But I would just like, and it's a great opportunity, just to confirm one quite critical thing, which I know a lot of people are talking about. I'm aware that in certain parts of the country, there is no doubt that some council car parks have been run for profit purposes. And those were the council car parks, more than anything else, that suffered significantly during COVID when suddenly parts of revenue were not met. I want to make absolutely clear to the Commission, to you, to the residents and to the business affected, this is a cost recovery model, which in part is why the initial charges are, I've got to be careful how I say this, low and so low. The ambition of our scheme is to make sure that that £450,000 that is currently being used, diverted away from other council services, can effectively be ring-fenced. I've got to be careful with the language that I use, and as such can be designated for one purpose, which is the fair provision of safe and affordable car parking services on a cost recovery basis. We have modelled, and certainly our consultants have modelled, usage and usage data and come out with pricing on a cost recovery basis only. Whilst I cannot commit to never putting prices up, which I think is one thing you mentioned earlier on, from my perspective, a cost recovery basis is just that. I want to recover the costs that otherwise might be diverted elsewhere. But Harry, you raise a point, which is what if the car parks actually do make a small surplus? You rightly observe that current legislation is very restrictive in terms of where that surplus might well be spent. In fact, it's predominantly, other than set-up costs, to cover environmental concerns. And I hope, without swaying too much, I can commit that actually, if there is a small surplus, that will be distributed back to the towns that contributed towards that surplus, which I think is only right and fair. But I think, just for the avoidance of any doubt, numbers like millions, which I know you just made as a point, all of our modelling suggests that those type of numbers will not happen. Hence the pricing structure in order for us to break even on the parking provision that we make. But I will pass over to Ralph and James if there's anything else you want to add.
Would you like me just to answer the consultation question? I think Councillor Hewitt's covered the other part. So yeah, the consultation, you're quite right, it's not on the principle of charging or not charging. It'd be a consultation on changing the legal car parking orders which we have to have in place to manage the car parks. So it will be the changes that we have to make to those car parking orders to enable the policy change to happen. And in terms of the timescale, we're currently looking around about October, November to put that in place, and we'll obviously be open about when that sort of consultation happens, and we'll be transparent about that. I think Councillor Hewitt's picked up the point about the surplus, as you said. 5.2 in the report outlines really clearly what you can and you cannot do in terms of any sort of like income revenue generated from car parking charges, and legally we have to stick to that.
Thank you, Ralph. I'm going to say this to anyone that happens to be speaking, whether it be question or answer. Can we try and keep the questions and answers relatively concise so that those people listening can actually follow the conversation rather than just nod off between messages? Next question, I believe, is Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. Simple question. We've seen from the presentation and the report that we're one of the last councils to even consider this strategy. So for clarification, Paul, and for us as ward members who need to go back to our parishes and start helping explain the situation, can you just explain why we are considering this at this time? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And actually, that question did come up at a parish council meeting when the proposals first made published on Monday. There is never going to be a time to get people to do something that they ordinarily would not like to do. There is never going to be a right time to begin charging when, in the past, people have suggested they could park for free. But let's also be clear, parking was never for free. We all paid for it. The challenge was that cost was shared by everybody as opposed to those who used the service. And certainly some of the data that came out from Parking Matters was very clear. There was only a handful of councils in the country, and we, with the exception of the very few spaces that are managed by Breckland, are the only council in Norfolk that don't charge generally for parking. I guess, and certainly the response that I gave to the parishioner on Monday actually was quite clear. For me, I think we should have taken this decision years ago. I think we should have taken this decision 10 years ago when the first survey was published in 2012. And if we had have done, the question I want to ask is how much more can we have avoided spending to provide the services that our residents really do value, as opposed to supplementing the cost of something which many of our residents simply cannot access. So, yes, there is a budget pressure facing us as a council moving forward, and that will continue, I suspect, to get worse as we move forward. Hence, we need to act now. Thanks.
Okay, just before I let Roger speak, are there any more people going to put their hands up for questions? I've got Roger and Claire. Any following that? Okay, I've got 4. Good. Be swift then. Thank you. Roger.
Well, I can't guarantee I'm going to be swift because there's 5 points that I want to make here, Chairman, which I think are very important. So I'll go through them in order. What consultation has actually taken place with the small businesses in each of the towns? Because I read somewhere in this report that's been produced that the consultants have said, and I think we don't suggest that you consult on this because the outcome would be known before we even sent out the consultation, because you think people would just say it's a bad idea. And as district councillors, we need to make that decision. I think that the people this will affect the most is the small businesses in the town. So that's my first point. My second point is that there was also a proposal in here for those local residents that use the car park, because they've got no parking provision on their own properties. We're proposing a permit of £150 per year. Will there be flexible payment options for those permits, or are we going to expect them to find the money up front all in one go? I think that's quite important. Also, on the issue regarding the actual paying for your parking charges, I'll give you an example. I've got 2 elderly neighbours. They're both in their 80s. The gentleman can drive, got all his faculties, but he's never owned a mobile phone in his life. He's got no intention of it. If you mention mobiles or Wi-Fi, he doesn't got a clue what you're talking about. I can see where we may, if we're not careful, preclude those people by the fact that they're probably not great with technology being able to pay for parking, and therefore we may put them off using the market towns. When
Roger,
it comes,
maybe we'll pause
and answer those,
let those points be answered.
If I may, I will start and then I'll pass over to Ralph. In answer to the first 2 questions about what consultations happened, the answer is it starts after the decision on Monday. The decision on Monday is effectively an approval to begin a charging model. At that point, we need to consult. And at that point, we need to consult widely for exactly the reasons that you say. People will have a clear view in terms of whether this may or may not be a good thing. Once they understand the reasoning behind we are making the decision that we are, at that point we're in a position to consult. I don't recognise the reference you made in the report, Roger, to be honest, but at the same time I can suspect the reason why that reference might have been in, which is the question, do you pre-consult? Do you say we're thinking about something before you actually start the consultation process, before the data is known? And I can appreciate perhaps that might be a reference within that report. In terms of the permit cost, the same answer. Once we have made a decision to move from a charging model, at that point we need to collect the data from our residents and so on in terms of what is an acceptable permit cost. And then the third one, super quickly, technology. has been one of the frustrations for whether we're using Swaffham or Adelbourne car parks. That's often been one of the bits of feedback. Technology must be easy to use, and I absolutely agree. It must be easy to use, and it must be capable of being used at the point of use. So card tapping in and out and so on and so forth. I know a couple of, forgive me, 85-year-olds who love using a parking app, but I also know a number of 85-year-olds who do not like using that parking app at all. They would rather tap in and tap out because it gives them a bit more certainty in terms of when they're staying or not. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I was just going to suggest for that one about the two that you asked about, the flexible payment options and the elderly using the technology, we asked sort of Gordon and Ben just to come in on that in terms of their expertise. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. I mean, from our experience, we always recommend that a variety of payment options are provided, and commonly now that would mean using a card. Because most people have a card now. As we said, 98% of people have a card, a cash card, and therefore that they can use that to pay. I mean, the phone payment is there as an additional option for payment, not as the sole option for payment. And again, just as part of the consultation and the implementation, we'll have to, careful thought will have to go into the number of machines and where they are provided, just to make sure that the equality impact element of it is covered. Again, just to go, I mean, all major shopping centres now have cashless parking, and they wouldn't do that if they were deterring any demographic. So, I think we sometimes do elderly people a disservice by saying that they're not able to use all sorts of technology. I can understand a lot of suspicious about leaving their card details on a website for pay by phone and so on. I know my own mum is one of those, but paying by card is something that the vast majority of people are used to now.
Okay, Roger, do you want to use your next 2 points?
Thanks, William. So the next thing I have to say I'm really concerned about with this So the one thing I'm really concerned about this is the impact on those employees who work in the town centres. So if, for example, I worked calculation out last night based on the Cherry Tree car park in Dereham. So if you're somebody that works in Dereham full time and you travel in from a village outside, you have to park up in the town 5 days a week. I worked out that they would be paying £768 a year for parking if they got nowhere else. There's nowhere to park in town on those premises. Those employees need to get to town and they need to work. So simple calculation, it was £3.20 for up to 10 hours you've got in the table here, 5 days a week. If you base that on 48 working weeks a year, £768. That is an awful lot of money for somebody who's probably working on a minimum wage hourly rate in the town centres. I notice in the report that there's mention of employers may be able to arrange for those costs to be invoiced to them directly. I can't see many small businesses wanting to add to their costs. So significant thought needs to be given to what we're going to do to support those employees working in our hard-pressed town centres. The other point I just wanted to make about the cost, really, Paul, you said it cost us £450,000 a year in capital and revenue for the car parks. But looking at the report on page 78 of the report pack, it shows there that you're expecting, after costs, to bring in year one, 1,180,000 in the first year, over 1.5 million in year 2, and 1.6 million in year 3. So that's not just trying to cover the costs that we have outgoings to pay for the car parks at the moment. That's a very significant amount of revenue that you're hoping to realise on the back of these charges. I think probably for anybody who's dialing in and watching us at the moment, I hear you when you say pay for this at the point of use, but there are a whole range of other council services that we provide as a council, which not everybody uses, but they are paid for via the precept. So why are we, I think that will be something that the members of the public in particular will want to know. Why are we singling out this? Why don't you say, well, there's a green open space in my village and you cut the grass on that? The residents in that location use it and they have to pay for it. How far do we go down that route? And I think that's a valid question that we need to have a very coherent answer about. Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, first things first, I was just trying to work out, Roger, the numbers that you were looking at in the pro forma B, and I'm not sure if you've understood them correctly. That's over a 4-year term, yeah? You've just accumulated a lot of income numbers up over a 4-year term and abandoned all of the costs of the 4-year term? Yeah, it's pro forma B, yeah?
It says year 1. Figure 6 on the cabinet. Figure 6 on the cabinet report back.
I apologise.
Roger, we can't hear you unless you put your mic on.
If you go to figure 6 on page 78 of the report pack, it shows 3-year projections there on income and expenditure for the car parks. And it shows there, year 1, net revenue before CPE contract, so we need to get to the bottom of how much that costs, 1,170,000, or just shy of 1,180,000 in year 1. That's because in year 1 you've got all the cost of putting in the machines, etc. In year 2 you're looking at over 1.5 million, in year 3 1.6 million. So that I think needs to be clarified, because people looking at that report will say, well, hang on, if this isn't a money-making exercise, how can you justify the difference, I think?
And I think I now understand that's the raw data from the initial report that proposed charging from minute naught, not offering free periods, and using a separate pricing structure. We challenged back to our consultants, and I'm sure they can respond back on their own behalf. We wanted to make sure that the offering included an hour of free parking for our car parks up front, because we acknowledged the fact that a lot of the car parking modelling suggests that the majority of residents move in and out of a car parks within 1 year. I would suggest, sorry, I was confusing pro forma B, which is our costs, as opposed to the raw data from the costs from the consultants. And again, and this was raised a bit this morning, we've given you the full consultant report over a period of time. And again, without putting words into our consultants' mouths, they can respond for themselves. But initially, they were looking at predominantly a financial model. What can we do to generate a financial return? Our challenge is, no, we want to protect our market towns, we want to protect our shops and villages, and we want to make a fair allocation, including for those visitors to our towns or those residents who move into our towns, shop and move out, allowing the churn for other people to move. I can now see the data. Apologies for what I just said earlier on.
Has that answered your question, Roger?
Yes, I think in part, but I think that what that then leads me on to suggest is we probably need to do a bit better job of presentation of the report, because people, I hear what you're saying about the raw data, and then you said, quote, we pushed back, and then there's these other figures. I think it would be very useful for the public to thin this out, actually, this is what we think the actuals will be, because it's very confusing in terms of raw data, you pushing back. Yes, it probably is all in there, but I think for the general public, if we could simplify that, I think it would greatly help.
And if I can respond straight away, Chair, yeah. And I think we should. The challenge that we faced is that if, for instance, and I love you dearly, if we redacted certain parts of the report because they were no longer relevant, your next question would be, where's the redaction? Let's do an FOI and let's look at the information through it. Now, I apologise, I'm putting words in your mouth. So we wanted to be as transparent as possible and say, here is everything, certainly as far as the Cabinet decision is concerned, to make sure that people understood what our consultants were saying, what we kicked back, trying to find a balance point between responsible budgeting and fairness for all to ensure that our final solution that we arrived at was clear and fair and appropriate.
So I think we all understand that when we consult, we need to have a concise paper that actually explains exactly what we are going to be doing rather than 150 pages that confuses people.
It would be immensely helpful then if we could have something simplified for the Cabinet meeting on Monday. I think but make sure that is on the screens on Monday for the Cabinet meeting so we can better understand exactly what those costs and revenues are going to be.
I'm sure the Chairman of Cabinet is listening. There was also a question around staff permits. I don't think that was answered. Staff as in staff from shops or workers within the towns.
And that, Roger, just coming back, that will be the basis of the consultation. We could say, and I don't want to be misquoted here, but we could say rather glibly that you shouldn't be parking in the towns anyway. But before you respond, that is a glib response. We could say, as part of our 2035 objectives, those people who live in towns, who are then driving into towns and blocking car parking spaces all day, avoiding churn, really should consider alternative means of transport. Again, that would be a glib response. What we do know is that there are businesses who have encouraged their staff. I was talking to one of those businesses, strangely enough, on Monday, who encouraged their staff to park in our car parks for free all day, taking up car parking spaces for visitors, and that's part of the conversation they have with their staff in the past. And we need to work with businesses who perhaps have suggested that in the past for exactly that reason. This is a difficult conversation that we will have with some businesses, and it will lead to difficult decisions that some of our businesses will have to take, but we will be in full consultation in that process.
Thank you, Paul. Claire.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I'm broadly supportive of the principle and reasons outlined today for the changing of our car parking model, as Watton Ward member, I feel I have to raise concern in this forum that the original recommendation by the consultants that Watton not be subjected to parking charges was not carried forward in the final proposals for consultation, at least. And given that we're focusing on fairness, can I respectfully ask why, please? I would have liked to have seen it included in the consultation. Thank you.
And if I answer first, Councillor, and then I will pass over to our Parking Matters consultant to say exactly that. A similar point was raised this morning by a Watton councillor, and I think it's fair to re-emphasise that. And again, it's almost linked actually to what Councillor Attwell at an earlier iteration of the process. At an earlier iteration in the expert process, one suggestion that our experts made, looking precisely at the number of on- and off-street car parking options within Watton as it currently exists, is there seemed to be an excess of car parking facilities, and their comment was, and this was based when they were suggesting charging from minute one, that we would probably do better purely financially to dispose of one of the underutilised car parks for building purposes. And I think the one from memory that they chose was Kittle Close. We kicked back on a number of reasons. One, that will not solve the problem that we see, for instance, in Goddard Court, where around 25 or so percentage of the vehicles are stationary, in some instances are actually, I think, been abandoned, which means that the rest of Goddard Court, actually, for people trying to move into that city centre, that town centre car park, no longer can find a place to park. And actually, I believe we've had conversations that at times Goddard Court is actually quite dangerous to walk around, particularly parents and children, because of the number of cars that are wrongly parked within it. A capital disposal won't help an ongoing budgeted revenue cost, and more importantly, a capital disposal doesn't allow us to ask a fundamental question: is it fair that one part of our district is treated differently to all of the other parts of the district? Bear in mind, all parts of the district are facing the same challenges. I did mention this morning that and I was actually accused of perhaps promoting Watton too much. I do not drive to Watton because it's free. I drive to Watton for the fantastic range of services that it offers. And I apologise, Roger, again. I will reconfirm, I think Gary's Place is the best fish and chip shop in the district. And certainly My Hills and Spoilt for Choices are places that I would go to time and time again because they give me the services that I want. I'm not being disparaging in terms of other towns and villages, but I do think that actually Watton has got a wonderful range of goods and services that you should be proud of. But I will pass on now, if I may, to a parting matters consultant to see if they want to add anything to what I've just said.
Ben, do you want to take this one?
Yes, as I said in the presentation, this is very much a bottom-up exercise, and from our point of view, we're looking at the operational difficulties and the market rate. Our job is a lot simpler than yours as the elected representatives of the district. You have to balance a lot of other aspects. But yes, from a technical standpoint, a bottom-up approach, we suggested that it probably wouldn't be worth your while to enforce and to set up the charging in Watton. However, as the councillor just set out, that was based on no free period. And actually charging for longer periods of time is probably worthwhile from a traffic management point of view and a churn and turnover point of view.
Okay, thank you.
Anything to add, Gordon?
That's fine.
I'm going to go on to the next question, which is Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we got any plans for number plate recognition cameras? That's one question. The other question is, have we got any idea how many outside people come into park, not residents, but for tourists and people who come into work from outside the area? Have we got any figures to know that? And the other one I want to say is, I'm not quite sure why we shouldn't make a profit out of car parking, because if we make a profit out of car parking, that can be used in each town to help them with other projects that they need to do. So I don't like this word of profit is a dirty word, because profit is to be spread to the towns that earn the money. Thank you.
If I come back straight away on the third point, Councillor, I accept that's a view of quite a few people, but we've modelled our pricing on a cost recovery basis, first and foremost, without planning to make a profit. For the other two options, do I want to pass over initially to Parking Matters to respond, and then if they've got anything, we can add some other things.
Okay. In terms of ANPR, unfortunately, legislation prevents councils using ANPR in the same way that the private sector does. Councils aren't able to ask DVLA for the ownerships, the car park owners' details, the specific legislation that precludes that. So there aren't the same benefits as the private sector. The private sector generally use it because it's very easy to send out PCNs, the parking charge notices as they call them, rather than penalty charge notices as it is in the public sector. But there are also other benefits of using ANPR, which is allowing for auto pay and frictionless payment, where you register your card and you just drive in and drive out, and the system automatically debits your card and you never have to pay at a machine. The issue with that is it's still relatively new technology in terms of the public sector. The parking equipment market isn't really providing that at the moment, but there are new systems coming on the market, which at the moment aren't tried and tested, just because there's it won't be worth putting those systems in unless people are happy, a sizable number are happy to subscribe to them. give their registration numbers and auto pay. But in terms of the council would still have to have civil enforcement officers walking around the car park to enforce unregistered members of the public who haven't paid or overstayed. So local government doesn't enjoy the same financial benefits as the private sector because of that legislation that I referred to earlier. So it is possible, and it is actually a good thing to consider for the future, as and when the technology is tested, to try and improve the customer service for your residents. But at the moment, we've recommended, just going with the payment machines and pay by phone as the options.
Okay, the next question I have is from...
And percentage of outside people coming in, anybody, any idea?
And again, I will defer to Parking Matters, but from the report, the data could only capture those vehicles who are in the car park and coming in and coming out. For the reasons identified outside, we cannot identify who is coming into the district from outside, in the same as we can't identify who's leaving the district to go outside without putting cameras up everywhere. And I'm sure Big Brother would have something to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
If I could, I was just going to say the one benefit of the machines that we've recommended is because you put in your license plate and the payment by phone, people will put their license plate. Moving forward, you will collect a lot more data in terms of who's using your car park, which will be a benefit for future reviews.
Taylor.
There we go. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Just a question on whether or not alternatives were considered, like expanding on the enforcement-only models in Attleborough and Swaffham. And if so, what made the proposal that's now being carried forward more viable as an option, please?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Alternative options were explored. We thought about, and actually these are outlined in the Cabinet report on Monday. One option is actually to do nothing. I think a couple of people said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why do we need to start now? And we know, and hopefully it's become clear to the Commission, that actually to do nothing is simply not an option. The budget challenges will continue to get worse. And I, for one, do not want to be the councillor who needs to decide as to whether we help a vulnerable resident or whether we let somebody avoid paying 50 pence for parking for a couple of hours within Watton. I don't think it's a fair decision that we should make. We thought of an enforcement-only option. That, unfortunately, whilst it might help churn, would only add to the cost pressures that this council is already facing. Enforcement is not cheap. As I say, it does help churn. We could say it would achieve one of the areas to look at, but it would add quite a considerable impact to an already challenged budget. And so the pricing option we felt was the fairest in terms of the district and also the most responsible in terms of budgets both now and in the future.
Okay, before I go to those people that have already asked a question, is there anybody that hasn't asked a question that wishes to? Just Robert. Yeah, I've got you, Robert. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you just explain the role of the County Council in terms of what has to be done on a statutory basis to make things happen?
And if I may, hopefully it's not a hospital pass, I'll pass over to you, Ralph, on this, because I know that consultation with the County Council, at least pre-warning of the County Council, has already started taking place.
Sorry, just waiting for the microphone to come on. So obviously we need to work quite closely with the County Council. They provide the on-street enforcement in the county. We provide the off-street car parking facilities. As Paul said, we have to consult with them anyway. It's a statutory requirement of looking at our car parking orders. We're involved in the Norfolk Parking Partnership. We're a partner in that in any event. So we will work obviously closely with them to make sure whatever we're thinking of doing and implementing obviously dovetails into what they're obviously any plans that they've got imminently. Incidentally, talking to them through the Norfolk Parking Partnership is a very interesting exercise, because actually, obviously, they are providing enforcement officers on street, and currently in Breckland, That's quite a difficult challenge for them because obviously a lot of people are not necessarily parking on the street and providing difficulties. So actually the economics makes more sense if you have got consistent enforcement both on street and off street. So we will work closely with them, we will consult with them, and we will work with them on what any sort of implications that this policy will make over the preceding period before we implement it.
Okay, I've got Harry now.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Paul. I think this is probably going to be a question for Paul or Ralph or the consultants, all three of you. One thing that Councillor Attenborough referred to was people working in towns, and we've talked about residents in particular and visitors in terms of churn. Those people who will be least unable to churn will be quite a large number of people who actually work in businesses. And speaking as a local ward member with that hat on as opposed to Breckland wide, which is obviously very important as well, one of the largest car parks we've got here is Cherry Tree, which is, say, 453 spaces. Looking at the local plan, roughly 31% of small businesses, independent shops, etc., are located in Dereham. So my question is, in terms of your consultation with businesses, how are you going to look at that? There's no differentiation at the moment in terms of permits, concessions between, as far as I've read it, between employees and visitors. The other couple of questions are one which possibly relates to what Councillor Plummer's referring to was, will there be any enhanced security cameras, etc., monitoring, which I did taking place already, and as part of your consultation is also the town councils who may also have parking facilities and things which they may be worried about them being, encroached upon and what we would call nuisance parking, displacement parking, etc. Thank you.
Harry, if I may, I will answer a couple of those, and then I'll pass either side of me. Just moving on. Yeah, your point about Cherry Tree actually really well made, because I recall having a conversation with you a number of years ago about trying to make sure that accessibility to the Cherry Tree before COVID was capable and able for those people who wanted to use it. And you raise an interesting point, which is that those independent shops rely on passing trade. And if passing trade cannot access those shops because space availability in the Cherry Tree car park is not available, that is damaging to them. So, yes, consultation will take place, and it will take place across the businesses that you talked about and across as wide a consultation process as we can possibly make. The ambition is absolutely right, and at this point, joking aside, we are absolutely aligned. We want our small businesses to make sure that they are open and available for trade and that customers come into those small businesses as opposed to going elsewhere. And the one thing that means that customers go elsewhere is when they come up to a location, they try to find a place to park and they simply cannot find it. That's when they move outside. But thanks, Harry. I'll pass over now to Councillor Suggett, if I may.
Thank you. I was going to pick up the piece, Harry, around the town councils and the sort of more broader, wider consultation piece. As you'll all be aware, on Friday, all members received an all-member briefing on the back of the papers being published. So all members were aware and had some narrative around the proposals. That's part of the wider comms package, which we've been working on really closely with this, because we realise and appreciate that this is going to affect a huge amount of people, all within different aspects. It does affect our residents, even though some of them don't realise that, but it will have a more direct effect on businesses, employees, etc. One of the interesting things that I found, which came out of the data that the consultants have produced, is how different each of the market towns are, the different offer around the towns, the different providers of car parks in those towns. So some do have town council car parks, some have got supermarket car parks, some have no other car parks other than the ones that we have in them. So they're all really unique. So there wasn't a way of being able to blanket everybody, as much as that would have been nice and easy for us to. So All members have received a briefing. Town councils, being that this is happening in their place, received a slightly different email to what went out to further district parish councils. So all our town and parish councils have received emails and correspondence from us on this. I can't remember what day it was, but earlier on this week we've had a meeting with the town mayors and clerks, and it was really good. It was really good for them to be able to ask some of those initial questions what they've had off the back of that immediate local response, what they've had come in their way, and for us to be able to explain some of the stuff like how we are to you now, for them to be able to ask some of those things which they've perhaps misunderstood and misheard. But we've also had letters gone out. We used our data that we have through ARP to reach out to our businesses. I don't know what the grand total is, but there was 123 businesses and service centres in Watton, 287 in Dereham, 179 in Swaffham, 248 in Thetford, and 131 in Attleborough. So we're not trying to shy away from this. We're trying to go as proactively as we can to as many of those users of our towns as possible, so that we can make sure that we're doing this in the right and proper way. And you would all have noticed on your members' email that you had come out the other day, we've got a link on there coming through to a page on the website, which is where we will be hosting everything and holding everything. So as this process goes on, it will get updated. There's frequently asked questions on there. But if anybody thinks of something, or they think you think we're missing anything, you guys can feed that in, come back to us. But we do have a first point of contact within the website, so that we can try and help people understand where we're coming to as best as possible. And just one other piece on the businesses, we also have the Growth and Economy team who already do a huge amount of support and help and services with our businesses. They're already out there. Some of them are having challenges. They're not car parking challenges. They're other challenges. You know, we're helping them already signpost places, see what it is that we can do to help support them. And those guys already have really good relationships with those businesses and some of those services, and that friendly face-to-face approach with those as well. So we are doing as much as we can to pick up that business support. But we'll hand over to Ralph for the CCTV question.
Yeah, just really quickly on the CCTV question. Obviously, subject to the detailed design, which is what we'll obviously go into post the decision on Monday, should the decision be taken. We're going to do some detailed design of the technology and the options that we want to put in place. And subject to that, obviously the aim is to make sure that we have the terminals that we've described for the cashless facility, and to be able to put them in place. The advice is to have additional CCTV and security on those, because obviously we need to monitor what's happening around those for security, which will obviously help sort of like double up on sort of like antisocial behaviour and security around the car parks in any event. So yes, is in the answer, it would enhance that.
All right, thank you all very much. I've run out of people asking questions, so before we move on to the next agenda item, I think the only thing I've picked up that the Commission would like Cabinet to consider is around condensing the report and making sure the paper shows finances of the actual scheme that's being consulted on, to avoid any confusion for those people that are looking at it going forwards. What have I missed?
Chairman, you haven't missed anything. I've found this pro forma B that Councillor Hewitt referred to. I don't know whether it's appropriate to ask those questions in this forum, or whether I should wait until the Cabinet meeting on Monday. An explanation, probably Alison's probably best placed to answer. A breakdown of these figures in here on the running costs, capital repayments, etc., and what they all mean. I think that's the table you're referring to, which is wildly different from the one I was talking about, hence why we want the clarity. But those figures, is it worth doing that now, or would you rather I wait until Monday?
I guess everyone's here now. I'm hoping we will end within our 1.5 hours, so you've got a few minutes. If you think you can ask that question briefly and Alison can answer it, that'll save it being asked again at Cabinet.
Okay, so it's page 204 of the report. Would you mind just explaining, because I can see there we're not looking to have any income in year one. The income in year two is roughly what we our current outgoings are at 450,000 a year. When we get to year 3, we're looking to double the income for the site, but we've got the same running costs. It says existing running costs, required capital, continued to revenue. So could you just explain those for us? What the new running costs are? I presume that's going to be metering, enforcement, etc., and what the capital repayment MRP is. I think that'd be really helpful for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So, and just going back to your earlier question, adding on to what Councillor Hewitt said, the Parking Matters report didn't include existing costs either, whether this pro forma B does include existing costs. So the new running costs are enforcement, card charges, a little bit of repairs and maintenance for signage, that type of thing. The reason it is higher in year 3 is because we're assuming that any decision made would lead to a start date of October 2025 if it goes ahead. So that's why you've got a part year in year 2, whereas the existing running costs will be the full year, so they remain the same regardless of the income. The capital repayment MRP is the sort of repayment of our capital costs because we have run out of capital reserve, so we're now repaying all capital spend through MRP. So that's something that you'll see more and more in financial reports now in the pro forma Bs. Was that all of the questions?
So in year 3 and year 4, I presume because we've got nothing in total revenue, we're saying that basically the figures are neutral. That does rather beg the question, why have we got them so that the cost and the revenue exactly match? Because I can't believe that for a minute that that's going to be the actual position. That seems more like an accounting process to make this look revenue neutral. Can you explain just some of the thinking behind that, Alison? Because again, I'm just trying to get to the nuts and bolts of what the public might be asking if they were looking at these figures, please.
Sorry. The whole basis of this was to be break even, and hence why it does show a 0 position there. However, under the legislation, it's break even over 4 years. So if you make a deficit in 1 year, you can cover it from a small surplus in the next year. So it is, for want of better words, an accounting presentation. But that is the whole principle behind it. You're right, in practice that will never actually happen, but that's the principle we've put this forward for, and over the 4-year period under the legislation it should break even.
I always enjoy an accounting lesson from Alison, and I don't need another one from Paul.
That's all right.
Good, thank you. Is there anything else that the Commission thinks we need to flag to Cabinet on Monday? Harry, what have we missed?
I may have not heard it, Chairman, but when we come to Cabinet, I think it's very important that there's the top line for anything will be, in any consultation, will be once the Cabinet's made the decision, if it goes along with the recommended options, that there's a very clear timeline about what is actually, that's at the top of everything that we're putting out there. In other words, this is who we are consulting with, this is the timescale period, this is how we're going to do it. So there's no ambiguity about, well, we didn't know you were doing it, or it's buried away in the small print. I'm sure it won't be, but that's the key thing. When people become aware of, much more widely aware of this, they'll say, well, what's the period we have to, that's what they were saying to us as members. If we're going to put our input in, where do we do it, how do we do it, where will that information be captured? It's a secondary thing, but the timescale is one of the key things. And I'm sure you have a portal where people can, on the FAQs, where people can, respond in accordingly, apart from individual discussions. Thank you, Chairman.
Harry, I've been assured by a nod of the head that will be done, and the FAQs will also be done so that we don't have to keep answering exactly the same questions over and over again. So both of those things will be picked up by the Chairman of Cabinet when it's discussed on Monday. Thank you all very much for the very cordial debate on that. That takes us to 8. There are no scrutiny call-in standing item. I haven't got anything on item 9. Item 10, we have got the work programme. Is there anything else members want to add to the work programme? Harry.
Yes, I've looked ahead to the next work programme, obviously cognizant that it's also, the next scrutiny committee on the 5th is also, for the next session anyway, is going to be at the same day as full council, which may not affect attendance, but I know that in the background, the housing strategy is being developed, so that's another thing which may not be able to fit into the September schedule looking at it, which is quite full, but that's really a sort of early alert to the portfolio holder to, I think, have that coming forward would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, just to let you know, we intend for the housing strategy to come forward for adoption during the course of the autumn, so actually it may be an opportunity to link the rather than scrutinise it during its development, when we bring it forward for decision, there'll be an opportunity there for scrutiny.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that brings us to the end of our meeting, so thank you all very much and safe journeys home.